Welcome to Checks and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And this week we've got the founder of Williams Corporation, the managing director, Matthew Horncastle, here to tell us about his story.
Hey, thanks very much for having me, guys. So I was thinking as we were walking up here how we're going to do today's podcast. And I think maybe we have to start at the end for the people that don't know who I am.
Chop it back like a Tarantino.
Yeah, and then chop it back like a Tarantino.
We talk about it, Matt. You got to have like the clickbait at the start, right?
Yeah.
They go, why should everybody listen?
Well, let's give them the clickbait. I'm Matthew Horncastle. I'm the managing director of Williams Corporation. Williams Corporation is a residential property developer. We've been in business for 12 years. We've delivered 1,900 houses to our customers, valued at $1 billion plus GST. So the 1.15, but we got the billion without GST now. I've been claiming the billion for a while, so because I put the GST in a couple of months ago.
You knew you were going to chase up an extra 15%.
And so we've done $1 billion of property development plus GST. We have development offices in Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, and Tauranga. We have a sales office over in Singapore. We have a business development support office in the Philippines.
Yep.
We're very good at what we do. We build a lot of houses.
Cool. And I must say, Matt, so you won't know this, but brand new setup today, right? So we've just rolled out the red carpet for you, given you the VIP treatment.
It's very lovely. You guys have done a great job. So let's try provide some value to your audience. And I think I have to frame who I am, and then we'll go through key moments and what I built, and then maybe dive into some lessons and try and provide as much value as possible.
Yeah.
So framing who I am as a person, I'm very, very fortunate. I've got great parents. If you met my parents, you would know me before meeting me.
Yeah.
So I've got a father who's a property legend, but real hard property guy of that generation of the older property gentlemen that are very tough businessmen. I have a mother that's a academic, real do-gooder, trying to save the world, lovely person, like head girl at school. First job was like understudy at some major bank, went to the university for 5 years and got like an unreasonable amount of degrees, that sort of person. Where I think through my childhood, I think one of the key driving points, because I look at what was different from me and what was different from other people. And my mother, although she made some money, we sort of lived like a middle class life. And my parents split when I was 2. And then my father, I realized when I was about 13 that he was really wealthy. And so when you live in the world, you don't really notice wealth unless you change between it. So like if you live in a poor neighborhood and everyone's poor, you don't feel poor. If you live in a middle class neighborhood and everyone's middle class, you don't feel middle class. It's what you know. But I think what happened to me was because I was going from living to my mother's house to my father's house, it became very apparent to me that I didn't, and because you're a kid and you pick dumb sides, it became apparent to me that I didn't have wealth. Yeah. So wealth became something that was quite important to me to generate wealth and independence. And I think that was something that made me quite different from other kids because I saw that difference and I wanted to accumulate wealth myself.
Do you think that was something that you knew as a kid, or it was like subliminal messaging?
Yeah, it's subconscious. It's only something you put together later based on observation. But you think to yourself, why was I a 14-year-old hungry for independence? Why was I a 17-year-old that made a business? And I think, and this is just me reviewing why I did certain things as an adult, and it's hard to know the actual reason because you're not in your brain at that age. But I think there was a subconscious feeling that I didn't have wealth and needed to create wealth. And so I went through life and I left home when I was 15. I left school when I was 16, and I've actually got quite a good story about leaving school. I called my father, and I actually tried to leave when I was 15, but John Key had made it illegal, so I had to wait till my 16th birthday.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, John. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, John. We'll discuss that later. So I called my father on my 16th birthday, and I'm like, hey, Dad, I'm leaving school. And he's like, no, you're not. And I'm like, well, you're in Christchurch. I'm in Nelson. There's nothing you can do to stop me. I'm like, I'm going to leave. And he's like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, wow, I haven't quite got that far yet, but I'm leaving this place. This place isn't going to serve me. And he's like, I'll call you back. I'm like, okay. He called me back probably 10 minutes later. And he's like, you start work tomorrow as an apprentice builder for your cousin. And I'm like, actually, credit where credit's due, Dad. That's really awesome.
That's a good shout.
And he said, you get a job because you're a Horncastle, but he said it's your job if you keep it, and it's your job if you live up to the expectations, and the expectations will be harder on you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's really cool. And so the next day I started work, and I have a sneaking suspicion my father said to my cousin, break him so he goes back to school.
Grind him.
Yeah. Break him. So I started as a commercial building apprentice, and we were doing commercial foundations for months and months and months.
Just steel tying.
Driving sledgehammers, driving crowbars.
Yeah.
Like my little hands would just be bleeding. And every time I had smoko or lunch or something, I had bandages in my lunchbox and I'd have to re-bandage my hands because just all day you're dealing with steel, concrete, driving sledgehammers, like brutal work.
Was there times when you were doing that where you're like, screw this? Or were you like going like, this is part of my journey?
Because you got a point to prove as well. It kind of motivates you, right? Like,
I must admit, I enjoyed it. Like I've never shied away from hard work. Don't get me wrong. You have the odd day where you're out in the rain and the cold and you're driving a sledgehammer and you're wet and you've been working 60 hours that week and you think to yourself, why didn't I go to university? I'd be around like lovely people. I'd be in an office. I'd do all these things. Why am I out in the rain driving a sledgehammer? But those moments are only short. Like I loved being on the tools. Like I loved construction. I loved the feeling of accomplishment. I love the sound and the feel of industry when you're on a site and there's diggers and trucks and cranes, the hum of human progress. Like that's cool. So I went through my apprenticeship for a year, and my cousin is just an absolute legend. Like he's 6'4", 120 kgs, but then disproportionately strong for a 6'4", 120 kg man. Yeah. Like he could just pick you up with one hand like you're a child. And so I worked in this crew that was essentially famous for being, we would work 60, 70 hours a week. We'd work all day, every day. We didn't walk, we ran. Like when we drove a sledgehammer, you'd drive it with vigor. Like we were unreasonably hard workers. And so I went through that sort of journey. I think when I started on my first day, I would have been approximately 65 kgs. And 8 months later, I was like 85 kgs of just like muscle. You just have to just eat constantly because you're just burning 5,000, probably not 5,000, but like 4,000 calories a day, just cranking. So that was really good. The economy back then was quite hard. So this is 14 years ago. So the economy back then was quite hard. So the jobs we did was quite hard. It was all commercial footings, commercial foundations. We re-roofed houses. We built cow sheds, like living on the West Coast for months at a time, doing that sort of work. And after about a year, I had developed a reasonable skill set, and what I started getting offered was jobs to do on the weekend. So building decks, building fences, doing stuff like that. And I obviously took them. And I was getting paid $13 an hour, and I was working 60 hours a week for my boss. So I seem to remember my paycheck being like $700 or something, some arbitrary amount like that. And I could make $1,000 a day working in the weekend. Yeah. And so I just took all the jobs, every deck, every fence, every patio, did all of them. And one day I got to a job and the person said I had to invoice him. And I'm like, are you sure you just can't pay me cash? Sorry, ID. And he's like, no, you have to invoice me. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I called my mum and I'm like, hey, and remember, I wasn't very financially literate. And I wasn't actually very business literate. I was a young guy that was just doing things.
Driven and working,
Yeah, I was a good worker. I had great work ethic, but I hadn't developed an overly great mind. I hadn't developed an overly great commercial ability. I was just someone that showed up and did my best. And so I called my mum and I'm like, hey, I'm doing this job on the weekend and I need to invoice them. So I've got to make a company because companies send invoices, obviously. And she's like, okay. And I'm like, yeah, so can you help me make a company? She's like, no. And I'm like, oh, God. And I'm like, call Dad. And she calls Dad. Oh, no, she's like, I'll call your father. She calls Dad and I'm like, hey, I need to make a company. And he's like, you're not making a company. You're not mature enough. You're not
Yeah.
strong enough. You don't have enough finances. You're a kid. And I'm like, oh.
You're like, I
Right,
just
well,
want to send an
I'm
I'm
invoice.
just
Yeah.
trying to send
Yeah.
an invoice to build
That's a
this
bit
dumb
deep, Dad.
shit.
Just let me get my money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so my mum hung up on my father, and she's like, go down the road. Craig down the road owns an asphalting company. I'm sure he could help you. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go down the road, knock on the door. I'm like, hey, Craig, Matthew, Catherine sent me down here. I need to do a job on this week and the weekend, and I need to make company. I need to send an invoice. And he's like, no problem. Like, great guy. Like that contract, New Zealand contractor, like beautiful people. Come in, his wife made me a coffee, sat down in front of his computer in his wee home office. And he's like, here's the company's office. Here's how you make a company. And here's one of my invoices. You do this, this, and this. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty easy. And that's when I started Matthew Horncastle Builders.
Yeah.
It might have been called Matt Horncastle Builders, I think. Yeah.
And what age are you?
17.
Okay, so you're 17, because once again, we fast forward and you've sold like over 1,200 houses, over $1 billion of real estate. And it's quite...
No, 2,100.
21, what did I say?
2,100, 1,200.
Yeah, 2,100.
You missed 1,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a rounding thing. 2,100 houses, over $1 billion plus just of real estate. And it's interesting, you look back at the start and probably, you're 30 years old, right? And you think about, and you'll be very used to this, right? People make assumptions, right?
Yeah.
People make assumptions around your background, assuming, this guy hasn't been, the sledgehammer in the rain, all of that kind of stuff.
Just walked into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turning around going, I need to send an invoice. All these people saying, no, you could have easily gone, this is too hard, but you're working these things out as you go, right? And these are really important fundamental skills to your journey.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And one of the main skills is just keep moving forward. And people just tell you no, and you just make your steps and tick through them, and you get your little successes and your little wins.
Yeah.
So carry on.
So at what point did you go, so you're working for somebody, you mentioned about you're starting to do these jobs on the side, somebody goes, send me an invoice, you're like, oh, in hindsight, would have been way easier if you just paid me cash. At what point did you pull the trigger and go, so you've got the company, were you still working for somebody else at that point?
Yeah, so there was still another probably 6 months where I would work for my boss and as an apprentice builder, and then I would work every weekend for myself. And it might have been a bit longer. And I actually accumulated, for my age and compared to all the people around me, I had quite a lot of wealth. Like, I owned my ute with cash, I owned all my tools, I had a trailer, I had money in the bank.
You're working a lot of hours though as well. Like you might be working like 7 days a week,
It was all
right?
day, every day.
Yeah.
Like all day, every day. That was it. I didn't drink, I didn't party, I didn't do any of that. I might have had a beer with some of the builders after work, but life was working. Life was productivity. Life was trying to make my life better in the pursuit of my goals. And so then what happened was, when I was just before I turned 18, the earthquakes happened, and I was actually building a refuge station on the West Coast. And my father called me, and I actually have to just jump back, and I have to give my father a shout out, because my father's a really tough businessman, and he's tough on me, but then also in the key moments in my life where I needed him to be my father, he was there.
Yeah.
So when I first started doing bigger jobs, I couldn't afford to buy the materials to do the jobs. So I was doing, like, say, $2,000 jobs. Then I started doing $5,000 jobs. Then I started doing $10,000 jobs. But I didn't have the money to buy the $6,000 of materials.
Yeah.
And I went and saw the bank, and the bank said, "Look, you're not credit worthy. We could probably give you
won't get from suppliers.
Yeah. And they said, we could probably give you a credit card for $5,000. And I'm like, shit, it's just not enough.
Yeah.
And my father, when I was probably 17 and a half, guaranteed an $18,000 credit card for me to go and do construction work. So, like, I have had moments where my family's definitely come to the party and assisted me. But then off the back of that, I don't, because my other siblings didn't get those things. So I think it was because, well, they obviously got helped in other ways, but it was because I was working all day, every day. And I think the family took an educated gamble.
Well, obviously, as a financial advisor, I see a lot of people who want to support their kids, and a lot of people do it in the wrong way, where little Jimmy's just a piece of shit, and like they're trying to get him going, and they think by giving, but
Here's a house.
Yeah, pretty.
Here's this,
I mean,
here's this,
Mike sees, here's $1 million deposit gift to buy a house. We talk a lot about being the fuel on the fire. So getting your kids to the point where you're seeing the right habits and you can help them get through the barrier or support them that little bit further, which is what you're talking about.
So then the earthquake happens, and I got a call from so this is the Christchurch earthquake, which at the time was the largest insured event ever to happen in history. There was then a $40 billion EQC insurance payout, huge amount of money, huge amount of opportunity. And my father called me and he said, oh yeah, I was building a refuge station on the West Coast, and he said, I don't quite understand what's happened, but there will be opportunities for 10 years. Just get in your car and come. So I went and saw my boss at the time. It was a really hard conversation. I said, thanks for developing me over the last 1.5 years. I'm going to go be part of the Christchurch rebuild. And that was a pretty tense conversation at the time, but I left and I packed up all my things and I went to Christchurch and I arrived with my stuff and I said, hey, I'm a builder. There's the whole city in rubble. There's 35,000 homes lost. I'm sure I can do something to help. And so I didn't quite have the skill set to do projects then. So what I did was I spent about 6 months where I was just a mercenary selling my labor for money, but full time.
Yep.
And then after that 6 months, I then started employing people and I ran a building crew. So I had maybe 5 guys building things. And then probably one of my next big steps was I read a health and safety journal in a construction magazine. And I essentially noticed that the new legislation said every site needed a construction fence. Now, for the younger listeners, they won't understand. Construction sites never used to be fenced off. You would just walk down the road and there would be a construction site. There was not fences. Like, that's showing my age. But like there weren't fences. And then under the new Health and Safety Act, sites had to be fenced off. And I saw an opportunity. And that's when I started my temporary fencing business, where I started importing temporary fencing from China and doing fencing jobs. And that's when I brought in Blair, who's my now business partner that ran that business. And so what was happening was I was going quite good. I had my building company. I had my temporary fencing company. I was probably making a couple of $100,000 a year. I think I was making just under $1,000 a day. I might have been making $300,000 a year. So I was going.
And at what age are you here? How far into your career?
I was probably 19 or 20, 19, something like that. So it was going quite good, but working all day, every day. We had a base out of a trailer park, which was really cool. I had the maintenance contract at the trailer park, and that's how I paid my rent. And I had my little yard, my container. I had my cabin that I lived in, and out the back of their office, I had my office, which was cool. And so, yeah, we used to work out this trailer park, which was awesome. And then I went from that to my father got a huge contract for insurance rebuild. And right at the time, he had a huge contract for insurance. So he was building about 150 houses a year. He had a company called Horncastle Homes. And he got a contract to build another 150 houses a year. So his business was essentially doubling. And right when he'd signed the contract, his construction manager had a mental breakdown. And so, or not a mental break, like a I can't do this. That was a bit dramatic. I can't do this. I don't want to double, blah, blah, blah. And so I got this phone call from my father's manager, and he's like, look, I've got so much on. I need someone that can just walk into the business, do the work, someone who's known by the trade, someone who's respected, someone that can just do it. And he said, it's you. And I'm like, okay, what does that look like? And I got offered an arbitrary salary, of course, $100,000. And I was making 2-3 times that. But I had a deep love for that family business. That was my name on the door. That was something that mattered and something that was special. And I'm like, okay. And so I said to my 2IC, who's Blair Chappell, I said, this is the game. I'll give you half the company. You run it. I'm going to go into this family business. I'll probably never come back out. But I set it up. I've got the foundation. I'll be here to support you. But I get half the money.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, man, let's rock. And so I went into the business, and this was probably my university. And so I went in and I just learned project management, operations, systems, and I had to learn fast, because I was very driven and very technically competent. I stood straight. I had a good handshake. I was a man, but I wasn't academically competent. So I had to read all the books, all the manuals, all the everything, and develop that really quickly. And I developed it quickly, and we had huge success building lots of houses. And then one day my father was just sort of talking to me like I was a child, and in like a company meeting, that relationship between us,
Just family.
had never matured to that next level, and just being spoken to like a child in front of the whole company when I was quite competent and earned my salt. I just, my ego couldn't handle it, but it wasn't a place that I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And my father's really great. And I was probably a bit weak and insecure, where if I observed it now as a 30-year-old, maybe it wasn't as hard as I remember it as a 20-year-old.
I mean, you think about, right, and you go like, how many people would want to work with their dad full time, or any sort of family dynamics, right? So I think a lot of people could understand why you'd look at that situation and go,
And then so I'd hit a disagreement with my father in a major operations meeting, and where I was essentially just spoken to as I'm his kid, which is fine. And then I remember checking my bank account, and I used to receive, it might have been $15,000 a month or whatever from the company. And I checked it, and I got paid like 30 grand that month. And it was like 3 times what I was making in my salary.
this is from what Blair's doing on the other
from
side.
what Blair's doing.
Yeah,
And
you're like, what's going on over there?
Yeah, I called Blair, and I'm like, I think you've overpaid me or double paid me. And he's like, no, we're just going good. And that was when I realized quite how good Blair's operational ability is. I created a company, and then Blair optimized it and made it make more money. And so I went and saw Blair, and I'm like, should we just go have a crack at the world? Should we try do it? And he's like, yeah, okay. And so we had these 2 businesses making $200,000 a year. It was arbitrary what it was. I was probably 21. And we said, well, the only way to make money is to make more businesses. Let's do it. So we started a civil company. We had building and fencing. We started a civil company. We started a temporary a composite decking import company, solar panel company, waste management company, IT solutions, because Blair's a business analyst. I can't remember. There might
For what period of time are you doing?
7 months.
Jeez.
Like unreasonable. Yeah. We went from say 10 staff right up to maybe 30 or 40.
Yeah.
And then, as you can imagine, the wheels fell off.
Yeah.
Right. We go from making all this money to losing money, and we just start losing just all the wealth that was accumulated, just stripped.
That must have been pretty stressful.
Awful.
Yeah.
Awful. We had this document, and it was like, because also when you're of that age, you don't quite understand finances very well. And we didn't quite understand the level of losses and how quickly liquidity was going to run out. Oh, we're also a property developer. And so
just quietly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I'll go back to how we started our first project. But so essentially what happened was there was a point where we realized that we could very really go broke, and we are quite possibly just going to run out of money. And so I had to sit down. I think I had to offboard like 34 staff personally, like horrific.
That's tough.
Not one PG though,
yeah.
Because I spoke to them honestly. I told them the truth. I told them my position. I told them what redundancy I could afford to pay them, what I couldn't. And I was honest and decent about it. And I told them that I'd overtraded. I told them that all these companies had stripped me of my wealth, and I'm really sorry.
You think about a lot of people in that situation, right? And I mean, you think during COVID and a lot of that happened, a lot of people are trying to protect their ego, right? And opposed to looking after the person, they do it. I mean, the famous one was that mortgage broking company in the States where this is really hard on me. I'm letting you all go over a Zoom call.
Yeah,
it's done.
3,000 people or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for you to be vulnerable and to be like, this is where things are at, I mean.
But it wasn't intentional vulnerability. It was, I actually truly cared about these people, and they were my staff, and their livelihoods were essentially there for me, there for me to provide. And I had to just be honest with them, tell them the truth about the business and the truth about what I needed to do. But we had this list, and it was essentially everything we owned, and we had to sell it to get the liquidity to get out of this position. And we were trading through days, and it was like, sell trailer. And it was like, you have to sell that Bryford trailer by Friday or we can't make payroll.
Yeah.
Like this is not an option.
Yeah.
Like this trailer has to be sold by Friday.
Yeah.
Or we can't make payroll.
It's a lot of stress to be in that position.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because people generally show up to work, get the paycheck, go home sort of thing. They don't understand the mechanics in the background of keeping a business liquid, making sure you can do all these things. And especially when times are tough, everyone's just kind of looking at you like, what are you going to do now? And you're like, going to try and keep the wheels on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that quote, you're in business to stay in business. So it's like you have to take all possible steps to stay in business. And so we essentially got rid of the staff, closed those companies. And as we were doing this, I said to Blair, I said, we've sort of got two choices. We go back to working for someone else, or we pick one thing and do it. And by this stage, we built about 3 houses. And I said, I enjoyed building houses. Let's build houses. And actually jumping back, because there's a good lesson here, I started all of those other businesses because I didn't want to be in property, not because I didn't love property, but because I thought that my success would never be mine because my father was in property and he was successful. And the way for me to have success that was mine was in a different industry. And so I went into industries I didn't understand, that I didn't have a skill. I've been on construction sites since I could walk. Like I have lived and breathed construction my entire life. It's all my family talks about. It's all I know. And so when I went into different industries, I got my teeth kicked in, as I should have, because I was an outsider. I was a tourist doing it to gain wealth, not out of a deep love and a deep ability. And that's a really good lesson, that you should do what you're best at, where you provide the most value, and the opinions of others mean nothing. And no one actually cared. That was just a dumb insecurity based on nothing.
In your head.
Yeah. So I think I need to jump back to how I did my first project, because there'll be a lot of people that want to understand how you do your first project. And we didn't make any money from it, so I'm not pitching this from a wealth creation perspective. But
for all the bloody dentists and doctors out there who go, I'm just going to start developing, let that point just really sink in.
The doctors are the worst.
And
every doctor wants to be a property developer. I'm like, when are you going to do this, mate?
Andrew Horncastle calls it the Matthew Horncastle effect, where every young buck thinks he can just build an unreasonable amount of townhouses because we make it look easy. But so essentially what happened was, right through this crazy period of creating all these companies, we went on Trade Me and we bought the cheapest block of land on Trade Me. So it was a site in Aranui, Christchurch, which is one of the poorest areas in Christchurch. The site was $60,000. We didn't have $60,000 liquid because it was all tied up in this failing business. And a guy that was doing our foundations, Richie, shout out to Richie, you legend, he said, I'll JV you on the first project. So what happened was, and this is a guy that I would drive sledgehammers with working on construction sites. Like, he knew I had work ethic, knew I had ambition, and he asked me if he could fund me on a project. So like, that shows if you go there and you work and you do the work, opportunities come to you, but you have to be in the arena doing the work. And so Richie said, I'll front the $60,000. So Richie paid for the land, BNZ paid for the construction, and we built one house. And we made $14,000 from it, $7,000 each. So it was pretty sucky. But what it did is we built a house, and we now had a track record that we'd built a house. And so fast forward to this empire's come, this little empire. We're probably doing $2 or $3 million a year revenue then, give or take. Might have been a bit more. And so our little empires come crashing down. And I said to Blair, we've got two options. We can go work for someone else. We pick one thing. We get all the money we can, and we do it with all of our heart, all of our soul, and we won. And that choice was obvious, right? And then the decision was, what thing? And I said, well, I really enjoyed building houses. And he's like, yeah, so did I. And I'm like, let's do that. So we started building these standalone homes, very similar to what you see in traditional New Zealand construction. And so we went from building, it was like 3 to 12 to 40 or something like that. But there was no real wealth accumulation, no real money made. And we were sort of just struggling to keep our heads above water, struggling. And I said to Blair one day, I'm like, I really want to be part of the Christchurch rebuild. I'm like, I know we have no money. I know everything's hard. But we're just building houses around in the burbs. How cool would it be if we were part of building the city? And he's like, yeah, that'd be cool, but we've got no money. And I'm like, but what if we did? And so I went on Trade Me and I found a 300 square meter site for sale for $150,000. And on that site, there was one 3-bedroom, 150 square meter house planned. And the house was probably worth $750 to sell, give or take. And so I'm like, let's buy that site. And Blair's like, oh, and I'm like, no, we're doing it. We're buying that site. And I sat down and I used to hand draw all of our plans. And I sat down and I cut the site into 3. and the house into 3. And I said, wouldn't it be cool, instead of building a 150 square meter house with 3 bedrooms, how cool would it be if a young buck could buy a house in the city and we could do 3 1-bedroom houses? And so I sat down and I drew these 3 1-bedroom houses with a living downstairs and a bedroom upstairs and a bathroom. And we priced it, and there was the same size as the 3-bedroom house. And I called a real estate agent and I'm like, what would these be worth? And he said, I literally sold a house just like that for $360,000. He said, there's a huge amount of demand for it. And now you're bringing in, for the same construction and the same thing, instead of bringing in $750, you're now bringing in $960.
The margin.
So all of a sudden it's like, there's quite a bit of money in this. And I'm like, okay, if this works. And then I thought of Robert Kiyosaki, if it's such a good idea, why don't you do 100? And so I went down the road and I bought another site, because I'm like, I think I'm on something here. I think this is going to work. And for some reason, I brought the other site to market before this. And we had 10 1-bedroom. So we had a 600 square meter block of land, and we had 10 50 square meter 1-bedroom townhouses on it. And we gave it to an agent, and he sold them all in 36 hours. Not unconditionally, but for the sake of the story. Yeah. And I'm like, we're on.
We've cracked
and
this.
And just to put it back into context, right? Like these are your big sites. At this point, you're not really making any money. That must have been like a pivotal change.
It was a pivotal moment. It was going from, because we had that early win, and then just a couple of years of just really hard. And then I was like, we're onto something here. I'm like, this is it. I'm like, no one's creating that young professional, the investor stock. No one's creating central, affordable townhouses. And so then we just cranked. And I'll just sort of discuss the volume for a minute, so I'm accurate in my numbers. But we just cranked. I'm just opening up a spreadsheet, which obviously, because we're now recording, is just being really slow to open. But we went from building...
Give us the year or the age as well, if you can.
Okay, so FY16, we built 3 houses. FY17, we built 20 houses. FY18, we built 40 houses. FY19, we built 61 houses. FY20, we built 178 houses. FY21, we built 335 houses. FY22, we built 494 houses. FY23, we've built 503 houses. And the current financial year, we've delivered 278 houses. We'll end the financial year on 450. And then we have 300 scheduled for the following year, just because sales have been a bit slower in the current economy.
And so that one site with it was 10 one-bedroom houses, you said?
Yeah.
That was the light bulb moment, and you're like...
Well, it was actually the little one. It was the little one that I cut into 3. Yeah. But then when the sales hit on the second site, that was we're on.
Yeah.
We're on. And so we had found a product that we developed ourselves, that we truly believed in, that we could sell, that we had a margin in. And that was sort of the foundation of the Williams Corporation empire. And it was a product that was non-traditional, that we created, we believed in, we wanted to sell. And I could sell that product all day, every day. If I'd sit with someone and I'm like, do you believe in the city? Buy your ticket.
Yeah.
Buy your ticket. It's only going to cost you $60,000 of equity from your family home. Buy a ticket. And back then, interest rates are 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
It was an easy pitch. And so we grow this business, and then you start to learn different things, right? So firstly, the sales channels couldn't keep up with the vision that I had. There are lots of little pokey offices that would sell 10 here, 7 there, but no one could consistently sell 20, 40, 50, 100 a month. So I went over to America, went to a whole lot of sales conferences, read all the sales books, and I built all the marketing books, and I built a sales machine. And so I had in-house commission-only salespeople. I had Facebook marketing where no one had tried to sell houses on Facebook. I'd buy leads for $3 a lead, have hundreds of leads coming in a day. I set up people in the Philippines processing the leads, sending them the emails, loading them in. We had proper pipelines of each step, what you do. We set up a proper sales channel, which no one had done it like the Americans, and no one had done it with the infrastructure and the technology and the CRMs and the automation that was available. The housing market was still very archaic. So I developed this sales machine, which started taking us just to the next level with horsepower. And then once I just developed the sales team, the banks stopped giving us money. So like at one point we were like, we might have been KiwiBank's largest active trading customer with like $30 million. And in property, it's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so the banks were like, you have to grow at this rate. You can't grow at the rate you want to do. And this isn't actually KiwiBank, just for clarity. It was another bank, and the bank doesn't matter. But
so they were telling you to slow down, and you had this vision of, I want to build I want to take on the world.
Yeah, and they set some arbitrary growth goal that we're allowed per year that might have been 30%, and we're doing 100, 300%. And so I walked out of the meeting once with a banker that said what growth goal that we were allowed to hit. And I said, Blair, no one's ever going to tell us what we can and can't do with our life. I said, especially a banker. I said, we're going to be our own bank. And so we went and so I said, well, how do I be our own bank? And so I had these little investors that were funding blocks of 5-6 townhouses, but our projects were getting bigger. And so I sat down with some of my investors and I'm like, can I put you all together in a company and you'll take security over the projects I'm doing? And now instead of paying you each year when each project finishes, you get security over all of the projects and I'll pay you each quarter.
Yeah.
And my investor's like, yeah, that's awesome. Let's rock. And so I made this company called Williams Corporation Capital, which was a wholesale finance company. It took securities over the work we were doing and paid our investors a 10% gross return with dividends paid quarterly.
Yeah.
And so we started by just accumulating people that we had dealt with, and then we opened it up to the market. And over that's been open for 4 or 5 years now. We have taken in $260 million of investor capital. We've paid out $39.5 million of investors. We've paid out $39.5 million in dividends, and we're paying another $2.2 million at the end of this month. We currently have $120 million under management. At our peak, we had $158 million under management, and we've redeemed, hopefully these maths will add up, I'm doing it off the top of my head, we've redeemed about $160 million to investors, which shows a really good liquidity for the investors. And that, once we fixed the money problem, we were on. Like it was like, okay, yeah, let's rock and roll.
I mean, that's where most property developers really struggle, right? Yeah. Is cash flow wise, they just... the wheels fall off.
Yeah. So we controlled our own capital, and we had that sort of at the peak of the market, 158 million under management. And we also had some really intelligent clauses in there, like when we essentially had a clause for the use of a financial crisis. And so our normal liquidity period for our investors was 6 months, where we'd pay their money within 6 months of receiving the redemption notice. But we had the ability to delay that to 12 months. Based on a few conditions in the IM, which matched protecting business solvency to deliver a work in progress through a financial crisis. Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a minute of how we traded through the most recent decline. But so we raised all this money. We got to a point where we were building, it was probably over 10% of houses in Christchurch. Like we were something at our peak, like 10% of all houses in Christchurch, and like 30 or 40% of the townhouse market, just an unreasonable.
Yeah. I remember, so I used to look after a team of financial advisors down in Christchurch, went down there last time, maybe 2018, 2019, went back in for a conference in, I think it might have been last year, and look around the city centre and you'd be like, what the hell has happened here? And we went down to do some financial literacy stuff, and the place is a vibe, it's completely changed.
Yeah, it's a great city. And it's a city I really believe in. Like, I really believe in that product. I believe in the future of Christchurch. Christchurch is a very livable city, and people live a really good quality of life there. So yeah, we build these funds, we get this financial horsepower, we take an unreasonable market share in Christchurch, we then fly up to Auckland. That was about, 5 years ago, because all these stories sort of overlap, but I've got to try to tell it in a concise manner.
Yeah.
We fly up to Auckland, we set up an office in Auckland, we do well. We set up an office in Christchurch, then we set up an office in Tauranga. So the market's going really good. One of our key milestones was we'd done 23 million of revenue at we'd done 30 million of revenue that year at 23. So that's sort of, you start to see the growth that we were doing. Put that in perspective, like we said at the start of the podcast, we've done 1.1 billion in revenue. Last year alone, we did 363 million. So we're transacting at over $1 million a day. And so, yeah, we open these offices through New Zealand, Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, Tauranga. I then decide that we're going to have a crack at Australia. So we go over, and I'm very ambitious because I've had this sort of 7-year run of success.
Yeah.
Probably 6 years at that point. And so I opened Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane at the same time. We also had a sales office in Singapore. We were just selling like hundreds of houses to Singaporean investors, helping them participate in the New Zealand property market. And we opened our support office in the Philippines, because if you go back in time 3 years, you could not get the people. Like, you couldn't get enough architects, project managers, and so at least when you went to the Philippines, you unlock another 105 million people that you have access to do those key services and those key things. And so I think we need to, that fire truck.
I know. I was going to say, can't find a lot of people for jobs, but at least we've got somebody on the siren.
Yeah. So the Philippines office fixed the capacity risk. We had these amazing sales where we're fishing in a different pond coming in out of Singapore. We had offices through New Zealand and Australia.
You're just going for it.
Yeah.
Going for it. And so I think I probably need to discuss COVID. So COVID was a very scary time because we had a big property position. We had to pay our investors. We have to pay our interest. And when we went into that first COVID lockdown, no one knew what was going to happen. And I had funders pulling out of projects and horrific. And I think there was something generally pursuant with, I had 2 big funders pull out or something like that right at the start of COVID. And I needed to raise X money. The number's not relevant. And it was just like, is the global economy going to collapse? When we come out of this, is there an economy? What does that look like? Will anyone want to buy a house? Is everyone going to die?
Yeah.
This was the narrative we were told. And politics aside, it was a very scary time. And we used to have these war meetings, and we would meet 3 times a day. And it was essentially the main thing we had to do was make sure the business was financed to do our job. And I think we raised like $23 million through the COVID lockdown.
During the first lockdown.
Mainly out of New Zealand? Or?
Yeah, mainly out of New Zealand.
Yeah.
And so shout out to the investors that support us. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
You think about the mindset during that time as well, right? Like you mentioning, not sure what's going to happen, and you guys are like, we got to keep this thing going.
We've got to keep going.
And you're just knocking on doors.
Go.
I'm sure for that $23 million, there was a hell of a lot of no's before you got some yeses.
Oh, just unreasonable. People were scared. But I actually had this one young consultant that we took. I think he was working in like a Chinese restaurant washing dishes. Rian, you're a legend. And he was on like minimum wage, and I read about him in the paper. And he had bought 3 houses, and I called my sales manager in Christchurch, and I'm like, we've got to give this kid a job. I'm like, he's a legend. And he's like, he's our customer. And I'm like, awesome. I called Brian, and he came around to my house, and I'm like, right, quit your job. You work for me tomorrow. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, how much do you make? And he's like, 60 grand. And I'm like, I'll guarantee you 80. You start work tomorrow. You're selling houses. And that was 1 month before COVID lockdown. During COVID lockdown, he alone sold like 8 houses for me during the lockdown. Like, he was just an animal, just in beast mode. So there were some wins, there was some stressful periods. We traded through COVID, and then, as we know, we had this unreasonable growth.
Not what everybody thought was going to happen.
Which I actually did call. I called, everyone said property values would drop, and I said it'll be the exact opposite. There'll be a safe haven sought for cash, and property in New Zealand property will be seen as a safe haven for cash, and I said it will jump. I didn't expect 15% a year. But so we had these 2 years of this unreasonable inflation. And during that time, I was pretty bullish. We did a lot of stuff. We got to the peak of the market started declining. And that was when I realized what was going to happen. I didn't actually understand the how much decline there would be. So I thought sales would reduce by, say, 50% and values would drop by 8%. I didn't expect sales to go down to like a third, and to values to drop sort of 15, in some cases 30%. So it was more violent than I thought it would be.
And if I can just jump in, the mindset, have you still got at the top of the market that world domination mindset?
Yeah. So it was there was a lot of ambition.
Yeah.
It was, we're going to be a company that does $1 billion a year in revenue.
Yeah.
We're going to have offices everywhere. We're going to just conquer the world. But one of the problems was I didn't understand how complex my delivery risk would be. Like, you think about trading through COVID in this multinational, multi-city property company where you have COVID lockdowns in and out, periods of huge periods of time with no productivity. You have Suez Canal blocks and global supply chains at a terminal where you have people not being allowed into the country because of COVID.
Yeah.
And you have all of these sort of really complex nuances that make delivery really difficult. But my vision of being the biggest was a good vision because it was something that was easy to communicate, easy to inspire people, and easy to attract talents that wanted to be around ambition. So although I should have understood market risk better, and I should have reduced trading as we entered that tail end of the bull market, I still think that base ambition was a key part. I'm not sure if I could have built this company without that war cry.
Yeah.
And so the market turns, we start to understand that the market's turned. And so we saw it, we picked it, and we laid off a third of our staff. Now, we got crucified in the media.
Yeah, I remember it.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, they came after me hard, which is unjust because in hindsight I should have sacked 2/3. That's facetious, but like in hindsight we reacted, but we actually should have reacted slightly more.
Yeah.
But then also, one thing you have to understand about Williams Corporation, and I think a few of our critics don't understand this, when the market turned, we had still built approximately 1,300 houses. We had made a good margin on that 1,300, and I won't say the number, but we had a big war chest of tax-paid cash. We also had $158 million under management that we had the ability to freeze for 12 months. And we had a forward sales pipeline at that time of about 700 houses. So because those three factors were in place, we were in a really strong position to trade through a quite difficult economic time.
Yeah.
Now, if any of those, because at the peak of the market, we had a $950 million book. Well, that's in realized value, not work in progress, but in realized value. It was actually a bit more than that, but like it was a huge property position, but a big percentage that was sold, and a huge percentage of the cash we needed was controlled by us in our fund, and we had that big chunk of tax-paid equity from the trading we had done previously. So we start reducing so we trade through this sort of 1.5 years of property values declining. Property values declined 15%. They've just come up 3% the last 3 months. How good? So we reduced staff count. We closed offices that weren't productive. We pulled out of Australia. The reason we pulled out of Australia is we needed all of our talent on delivering our work in progress, and we needed all the cash in New Zealand to deliver our work in progress. Was
that hard for you to do? To take us, as somebody who's wanting to take step after step forward, was it hard to take a step back?
In the beginning, it was, but then when you realize what is important, the business's health and well-being, and all other decisions that involve ego are irrelevant, and what matters is there's ex-customers that have relied on us to build their home. There's ex-investors that rely on us to manage their capital. There's ex-financial institutions that rely on us. we need to make the decisions that is the best for the business and the stakeholders of that business.
Yeah.
And your ego has to be checked at the door.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, I did, it took me a few months because I just had such a long period of not winning, because it's not true, because we got our teeth kicked in a few times, but it took an adjustment period, and it felt like, and this is probably not the right analogy, but it felt like cutting the arm off your child to save them from gangrene.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this business is 12 years of my life. It's what I've done every single day for 12 years with all of my heart, all of my soul. And to just lop limbs off it, it's horrific.
Yeah.
But if your child has gangrene in its hand and it's going to kill your child, you cut the arm off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I did feel like I was disfiguring my child.
Well, in hindsight, after you've had lots of time to process it, right, you're like, yep, it was the right thing to do. We had to go backwards and kind of consolidate to focus on these things. But at the time, I just imagining the change in mindset from forward, grow. And I've even heard you talk about I think it was from the biggest property developer in the country to, I remember you switched to talking about, I think it was 500
with excellence.
Yeah, 500 houses a year.
With excellence.
Yeah, and that switch. And I mean, we talk about, the amount of property developers who don't survive those changes. I mean, I think a lot of it would have to be with that switch in mindset to go like, how do we make sure this thing that we've built survives this period? So then the market that we're moving into now, I mean, you must be feeling very bullish on what the next 12 years looks like.
Yeah. So we reduced headcount. We focused all of our energy on delivery, retaining our investors, making sure all the ducks are in a row for the business to trade. Strip back, close some offices, like we're just exiting our last few Tauranga positions. We'll only be Christchurch, Auckland, Wellington. Delivering our book and then going to a point. But we held back. We have finances to buy now, and we've held back. The reason being is just, if we want to make sure the business is absolutely as strong as possible, and every month we're delivering all these houses and our balance sheet strengthening, our work in progress is decreasing, and we want to make sure we do our job with absolute excellence. And so we trade through this period, which has been really hard. Like it's been a hard period. Property values took a bath. Like it hasn't been easy. But now we see the little shoots coming through the snow. Yeah. Little shoots of grass coming through the snow. And you've got property values increasing 1% a month in Auckland. People coming back. Last month we sold 19 houses. The month before we sold 25. The month before that it was 23. This month we have a really real shot of getting 20-30. Yeah. We've got 65 houses under contract. So like, it's definitely has that feel that we've come out the bear market and we're entering another bull market. Mm-hmm. And the last bull market the last cycle, values declined for 5 quarters in a row, and then had 43 consecutive quarters of house price increase. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 10.25 years of consecutive house price increase. This market, we've had 5 consecutive quarters of decline, which isn't actually technically right because one of them was stagnant, but say for the sake of making the data look pretty. Yeah. I'm
smiling at Mike because Mike's been dropping this in meetings a lot now, talking about those stats.
Well, I mean, I guess it's a stat, but being on kind of the coalface of property and sales and settlement, you get to see the market move in real time from a sentiment position from the customers, but also from a transaction position as well, which is, for us who are intrinsically tied to property, it's been a cold 18 months, and it's starting to heat up.
You can feel it.
Yeah. And we did a podcast maybe 3 months ago saying we think we're at the bottom, and this is why we think we're at the bottom. I don't mean to pat ourselves on the back, Mike, but
how long ago?
About 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And you can just feel and I know we were at breakfast before, and you were just rattling off all these stats of kind of why you're so bullish on going forward. But the other thing is just the sentiment when you're talking to people. And Mike, I know you've spoken about from like people going, maybe I'll get a pre-approval, to here's a sign S&P.
Yeah, and it's kind of exactly like you say, right? People going, I think I might want to buy a house in the near future. Maybe I should get back in maybe I should get an investment.
Maybe I'll wait for it to drop a little bit.
here's the signed contract.
Yeah.
Find me the money. Find me the money.
Well,
yeah.
Just a little bit on macroeconomics, because I completely agree with you. New Zealand's migration is sitting at a net positive increase for a rolling 12 months of approximately 110 to 120,000 people, which is the largest we've ever seen net migration. We have a natural birth over deaths rate of anywhere from sort of 20 to 30,000 people a year. Let's be conservative and say 20. So our population's growing somewhere in the vicinity of 130 to 140,000 people per year. Now, the New Zealand median house has 2.7 people living in it. So we need around that 40,000 houses a year. A lot of people say closer to 50 because you've got houses being demolished, houses becoming unlivable, and the data seems to always come in higher than we forecast. We reached our population of 5 million people 10 years before all the government forecasts. So that sort of number's about right. But the New Zealand construction industry can build somewhere in the vicinity of 25 to 30,000 houses a year, probably closer to 25.
Yeah.
And we're currently seeing record low building consents. So we just have this really, really clear deficit where we're not building enough houses to keep up with population growth. And any economist that's read any book, and anyone that's read, say, Adam Smith, which more politicians need to read. Can any politician reading this read Adam Smith, Wealth and Nations, please? But we have a fundamental imbalance between supply and demand. When that happens, prices increase. The New Zealand median house prices increase 7% every year on average for the past 42 years. If we look at rents is a really clear indicator when there's pressure building in the housing market. For the last 10 years, rents have increased on average almost perfectly 5% a year. Rents are currently moving at just over 7.5%. And that shows the pressure building in the market. Yeah. And that's going to really translate quickly through to house prices. Yeah. We've seen house prices increase 2-3% in the last 3 months. And I think we're going to enter into another really good bull run. But the one thing I'm going to do differently in this bull run, I have a really good understanding now of delivery risk and market risk. And I don't want to just focus on doubling or tripling the business every year, because you end up in this game that will end in tears. So at the moment, we're going to build 450 houses this year. We'll build 300 next year because we've got a 1 year lag. Yeah. So we're doing the work next year that we've sold this year, right? And then it might be one more year of 300, depends how the market goes. But I'm very seriously considering capping our delivery at 500 a year, just because I haven't worked out at this stage how to solve the delivery risk problem. When we have a multi-city company like Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, and we're trying to logistically sort 42 houses a month, $1 million a day of transactions, get the people, the resources met, and also build it in a manner where you could go through every single house, shake the customer's hand and say, I built you a good house, I did what was right by you. And I haven't currently worked out how to make a business bigger than 500 houses a year from a funding management, sales, delivery, warranty, quality, customer service perspective. So what will either happen is A, we will stay the same size, or B, I'll work something out that makes the business better, and then we can review the size. But at this stage, it's 300 houses a year for the next 2 years forward because of the sales we're receiving now. Yep. And then as the market increases, we'll go back to that 500 a year. But until I saw the delivery risk, I'm not going to go bigger than that. And I've very much changed from the young warrior on the horse charging to greatness to the diligent. I don't want to say conservative because that's not the right word to describe me, but the
diligent.
Yeah. The diligent businessman that trades understanding market risk significantly more than I did when I was, say, a 20-year-old.
Yeah. And that maturity in business and kind of the mindset around it is a really cool thing to see as people develop over time, right? Like it's like, I mean, the old adage, you never waste a good crisis, but whether that's on an operational perspective or just from here's the lesson that I learned and how am I going to make myself better and my business better, which is a better product for everyone.
Yeah. I completely agree. Yeah. And you have to have that love for the customer. You have to have the love for the company. You just have to work so hard. Yeah. Like I was talking to someone the other day and I was saying, why did the successful kings ride into battle first on a horse? Now think of the scale of a war Alexander the Great slashing down 3 men when both armies have 10,000 men. That's not consequential to the battle, but his 10,000 soldiers behind him seeing him cut down 3 men first, that's what changes the battle.
Yeah.
So you as a leader of a business, you have to be prepared to understand the jobs of all of your subordinates, be able to do those jobs to the best of your ability when appropriate, and have a fundamental work ethic where if someone did a third of what you do, that would be respectable.
Yeah. I've got a couple questions before we wrap this up. The first one I want to talk about a little bit is, so you're 30, you're building this big thing in your 20s, you're comfortable articulating kind of what you think about the world. At certain points, the media's come for you and they've given their opinion, and there's been lots of things that have come out. How has that shaped who you are, and how did you deal with those things?
I think when I was younger, I got more hurt by it because I was someone that would wake up every day and truly do my best. And I have sort of conservative values and conservative views, but I'm never ever malicious. I don't ever say things to try and hurt someone. I'm not that way inclined. And I've had views that I've expressed that I should have articulated better. And it's very, very easy to take something someone says and take a word of it, or 3 lines or 6 words, and frame an argument because they're now this side and this side's good, this side's bad, blah, blah, blah. And now I truly don't care about the opinion of others. Like truly.
And how long did it take you to, like you mentioned, you're building this thing, it's your baby, like you've spoken about, and people are attacking you. It's not like I'm guessing it's not an overnight switch to go.
Yeah. It's a personal development that you go through, and I think the foundation is, if you truly do your best, and these are my rules for life, it's exercise as much as possible, right? Keep your body conditioned, eat clean food, reduce any things that could be harmful for you, so things like alcohol, reduce where possible, do something productive each day to the best of your ability, educate yourself each day, and spend time with people that you like.
Yeah.
And if I find that every day I do all of those things, I am just comfortable with the man I am, and external things happening in the world don't seem to affect me. I've got far more, but also I think from those early days of making comments and being attacked, I think I've got better at articulating what my worldview actually is. And as I've got better at articulating what my worldview actually is, I've found that I've been attacked significantly less. So it was actually, I'm not saying that it's okay for the media to go after a 20-year-old businessman doing their best, but it has forced me to develop my communication ability to the next level. They've done me a favor.
Yeah.
Right. Everything that's happened to me has done me a favor forming who I am.
Yeah. The second thing I wanted to ask you was, you've been able to explain really well, like, this happened and then we built this house, this many houses, this many, and now we're this big juggernaut. How the hell did you learn the skills that you needed to learn? Did you identify, I have these gaps and I need to bring these people in to support me? Was it a lot of self-education of, I have these gaps, I need to go and learn these things? How the hell did you work that out?
I think it's a little bit of everything one day at a time, right? So you're there and you go, our accounting records are not intelligent. And let's say you're building some fences. My accounting records are not intelligent. I'm going to get rid of my current accounting person, bring in a slightly better accounting person, bring in the next caliber of person. But I'm also going to read 6 accounting books. And I'm going to watch 12 videos on YouTube from some legendary Indian about how I do accounting, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's a mixture of knowing when to swap people in and out, but also you have to develop yourself. If there is a hole in your business, there's no better person to solve that than you. But It's just, remember, in 12 years, there's a lot of days, and you just do it one day at a time, one task at a time. I'm going to get our project management 10% better. I'm going to reduce, and like talking about a few key wins, we built 43 townhouses in Christchurch. It was a $32 million project. We pretty much sold it out in a day. We built that project in 5 months. Like Williams Corp at its core, when Williams Corp turns on, we are unreasonable.
Yeah.
Now, we've had projects that have taken too long, right? I'm not being righteous on any pedestal, but the core of Williams Corp is exceptional. And we stand for something that we weren't just charging to be the best. We stood for something more. It was kind of like the people that believed in freedom of the individual, freedom of the economy, property rights, the person that stayed that extra 2 hours of work, the person that swept the floor but got into the corners and did it with excellence, the person that when you use the bathroom and there's pee droplets on the toilet seat, they dab it with the toilet paper and leave the bathroom looking immaculate. Like the person that truly believed the individual can make the world a better place through pursuing their excellence. And that was like our culture.
Yeah.
We had this, but it's not like in a self-development way. It wasn't that just because you got some washboard abs, you're now. It's
almost that Atlas Shrugged, like Randian kind of like pursuit of excellence.
Yeah. And pursuit of complete internal individual accountability, and not requiring validation from external forces. Yeah, it is Randian. It's my favorite author.
Matt, we have our listeners are a lot of people looking to buy their first home, a lot of people looking to buy investment properties. Just before we wrap this up, we should let you give your plug. Why should somebody come and buy a house from Williams Corp?
Okay, so I'm Matthew Horncastle, Managing Director of Williams Corporation. Williams Corporation is a residential property developer. We specialise in infill townhouses, affordable to buy, affordable to live in, affordable to maintain, where you can live, work and play. The way to visualise us is we're like the Hilux or the Tesla of property. We're not the cheapest. We're not the most expensive. We're a really high quality mid-tier asset. We're really good at helping first-time buyers, investors and downsizers. We have development offices in Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland and Tauranga. We have a fantastic list of houses, really great options going from 1-bedroom townhouses and apartments right up to 3-bedroom family homes and commercial spaces. Where we are really good is not only is the quality of the product great and the price points competitive, we think outside the box to create value for you. So a good example of us thinking outside the box, a huge percentage of our work in progress has Airbnb consents. So we can provide houses that you can A, live in, B, rent out, or C, list on Airbnb. We're seeing some properties where we're getting gross returns of higher than 10%, and we provide furnished Airbnb investments for the customers. We're good at what we do. We've been in business for a long time. I'm going to be in business for a long time. I'll be here for your 1-year defects period. I'll be here for your 10-year structural period. I'll do what's right by you, and I'd love to have you as a customer.
It's a pretty good plug.
Yeah.
This is going to age really well, Matt, and we'll definitely have to get you back on and see what happens next. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening. Please make sure to subscribe, give us a review, a like, and we will catch you when, Mike?
Next week. Cheers.